The Child by L.A. Lewis. An English traveller, delayed in an unfamiliar village, hears a troubling local legend, one the villagers are reluctant to discuss. Drawn by curiosity into a nearby wood no one dares enter, he finds the past is not so easily buried. What he encounters there resists explanation, hovering uneasily between tragedy and nightmare. The tale unfolds slowly in quiet conversation and half-glimpsed memory before leading the listener into something far darker and far stranger than expected. Not everything seen can be forgotten, even when forgetting is all we want.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked drawer today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret?
The Child by L.A. Lewis. Because I'm not a member of the Psychical Research Society, and because I have never attempted to write a work of reference on occult subjects, I do not arrogate to myself any claim as an authority on such matters. Therefore, I shall not put forward a so-called scientific explanation of my experience at Wailing Dip, preferring to leave this task to anyone clever enough to recognise the place from my account. Its real name, of course, is different. Naturally, I've read a mint of other people's efforts, both serious textbooks and works of fiction, but in spite of all the mass of conjectures about spirit manifestation which they have contained, I am left guessing as to whether what I encountered in that revolting house was a spirit craving incarnation and angered by cruelly thwarted desire, or some monstrous survival, if anything more horrifying still. I got let in for the business entirely through my own curiosity, having always been keen on tales of the supernatural. I happened to be making a trip on my motorcycle to spend a couple of weeks with an old school friend on the other side of England, and having plenty of time to spare, was amusing myself, side-tracking from the main road wherever the countryside looked most attractive, in the hope of discovering some of those really old-world villages that one may still occasionally unearth in these days of the char-a-banc and filling station. Wailing Dip, its real name is equally quaint, proved to be one of those, and so charmingly unspoilt that I suppose I should have eventually paid it a lengthy visit even if my machine had not elected to break down just as I arrived. As it was, I found that it would be quite 2 days before the nearest garage could get spares from London and have me ready for the road again, and as I was still far from my destination, I decided to stop to supervise the job. I accordingly wired my friend that I was hung up and went to arrange accommodation at the village inn. The latter was in every way in keeping with the place itself, a dear little half-timbered cottage with delightful rose gardens at the back, extending to the borders of a dense wood. The landlady, an old-fashioned motherly sort, who told me she'd been running the place with the help of her 2 daughters since her husband's death 6 years before, made no difficulty about giving me a bed, and it was not long before I had collected my bag from the carrier of the motorcycle, washed my hands and face over the sink in the back kitchen, and taken a pint of beer out to a little table in the garden, where I relaxed myself to that particularly keen enjoyment which only a summer evening in the heart of the country can give. Mrs. Jackson, as I will call the landlady, came out about half an hour later to see if I wanted any more ale, and her daughters, apparently being able to cope with whatever business was in the tap-room, stayed talking for some little while. After I had told her a few things about myself, where I was bound for, and how I came to be passing through the village, I remarked on my appreciation of a place so wonderfully restful and off the beaten track, and began to question her about the locality. "Seeing that the spares I'm held up for can hardly get here before tomorrow evening," I said, "but I should like to spend the day exploring the neighbourhood. Perhaps you can advise me if there are any places of special interest that I ought to see." She mentioned 1 or 2 old churches within a 5-mile radius, in addition to Gormingley Park, the seat of the local county family. She feared, however, that I would not be able to look over the last-named place, since the family were in residence. They were, she explained, the chief landowners of the district. Whaling Dip itself being all part of the property. The squire's one of the best, she added, old-fashioned like the village. He's never yet turned out a tenant who couldn't pay his rent so long as it was really a case of hard luck or illness. And as for trespassing, why, the village folk can come and go as they like on his estate, outside the gardens, of course, and he never summons them, not unless they're poaching. Well, I replied, if that's the case, I think I'll spend an hour or two at least rambling in that wood. It looks beautiful and no distance to walk. As Mrs. Jackson made no reply, I turned to look at her, and found, to my surprise, that she was staring at me with an expression of the utmost concern. "Don't go in that wood, sir," she said, almost in a whisper. "There are plenty of others as pretty." "But, good Lord," I exclaimed, "what's the matter with the place?" For I could read positive fear in her eyes. Then I added, for the sake of saying something, "It's an old-fashioned district, but surely you don't date back to the dragons." "There you go, sir," she retorted most angrily, "laughing at everything before you even know what it is, just like the present generation." Then, realizing that I might be offended, for after all she'd only known me an hour, she went on with rather a forced smile. "You young gentlemen from the big cities today don't believe in anything you can't see and touch, so I'm not going to say any more. But speaking for myself, I wouldn't go in that wood alone for £1,000, and if you want to laugh, sir, you may, but I still won't go." I was intrigued. This smelt like something really worth investigating. "Mrs. Jackson," I said, "because I arrive in this village on a motorcycle, a form of transport that I detest, but can afford, don't class me with the type that carries a leggy flapper on the pillion and sports a cigarette holder a yard long. Believe me, I have really quite a serious mind. I've never seen a ghost, but would like to. I certainly don't laugh at them. You obviously have a good story to tell. Now, be an equally good soul, get me another tankard, bring yourself just what you feel like, and spare a bit more time to tell it." I had to say a lot more to convince her of my earnestness, but eventually elicited an unpleasant piece of local history, which would have been interesting enough, even without the sequel. It appeared that situated near the middle of the wood, which was 100 acres in extent and very dense, there was a gamekeeper's cottage, which had been inhabited by the same family in the squire's employ for an indefinite period, the job of safeguarding that particular covert having passed from father to son for several generations. The last gamekeeper, however, had never had any children, and on his death, only 7 years ago, a north countryman and his wife had been taken on to fill the vacancy. The man, according to Mrs. Jackson, had been quite a decent sort, if just a bit morose and unwilling to mix with the village people, but his wife, though good-looking, had aroused an antagonism soon amounting to hatred from the first moment she appeared. She was extremely selfish and greedy for money, and seemed to derive no pleasure from looking after the cottage for her husband, with whom, it was said, she continually had the most frightful scenes. Unlike him, she was not averse to the society of her fellow creatures, nor was she above coming into the inn unescorted and drinking gin copiously with any poacher or passing tramp who would join her. At these times, when her tongue was loosened, she made no secret of her opinions as to the dead and alive character of the village, the shamefully humble nature of her husband's work, and the even more shameful smallness of his wages. Some of the older women in the village had tried to reason with her, pointing out that many others were satisfied with similar occupations on the squire's land, and found their men's pay ample to bring up a happy family into the bargain, to which she flashed out that she wanted no squalling brat to guzzle the money that was already insufficient for two. Presently, however, the word went round, as such things will in a small community, that she was undoubtedly going to have a baby, and many were the hopes expressed that its advent would soften her and bring out the good which must be somewhere in her nature. In due time the child was stillborn and buried a few days later near the village churchyard, the father alone attending the funeral. When the wife was able to be about again, it was at once seen that no good had come of her experience. Rather, she was more slovenly and discontented than ever, and began to pay more frequent visits to the tap-room. Some pitied her, putting down her behaviour to the sense of fruitless travail. Others swore, by her own former statement, that she was glad to have no extra mouth to feed. A few hinted that the child had not been stillborn. The following year she brought another one into the world with the help of an old midwife who had attended all the births in the village for half a century, but who had not been called in the first time. It lived a fortnight, and was found by its father suffocated in its cradle the day after the old cottager had gone back to her home. The wife said that she had been out in the wood for an hour chopping sticks, and that the baby must have turned over in its sleep. The third year there came another, and this too met with an untimely end, being found with its neck broken on the floor beneath the cradle, which stood on a comparatively high trestle table, to be, as the mother explained, less easy for the cat to reach. By this time everybody was talking, which, considering the woman's reputation, was not surprising, and when the following year a fourth tragedy took place, the 2-month child this time having no marks to indicate the cause of death, an inquest was held by the express order of the squire. The post-mortem revealed that some sharp, thin instrument, such as a hat-pin, had been passed through one of the eardrums into the brain, and the traces of any external bleeding must have been carefully washed away after the flow had ceased. A verdict of wilful murder was recorded against the mother, and the case passed to the next assizes, where she was found guilty but insane and sent to an asylum. Her husband then threw up his job and left the neighbourhood, and the village concluded that the terrible drama it had witnessed was at an end. There was, however, one more act to come. Several months later the woman made her escape, and though the asylum authorities tried to keep it dark while attempting her recapture, the fact leaked out owing to her being seen by a courting couple entering the wood at Wailing Dip. Suspecting what had happened, these young people notified the village constable, who, through his county station, confirmed the escape. He also learned that the convicted murderess, who, it must be remembered, had not committed her crime until her last-born was 2 months old, was once more an expectant mother. A search party was formed, and had already spent some hours beating the side of the wood adjacent to the village, when word came through that the fugitive had been seen emerging on the far side and making her way towards a desolate stretch of moorland known as the Great Waste. Further scouring of the wood was thereupon called off, and those of the search party who were willing to continue their services were taken round to the new starting point in police cars. To cut a long story short, the mad woman was never captured. She had had nearly 2 hours' start from the time she left the wood, owing to the fact that her second witness, not knowing of the hue and cry, had failed to report seeing her leave it. With the assistance of bloodhounds, she was traced to the edge of the abysmally deep potholes which dot the moor in that region. Failure to pick up the scent from that point was proof enough that she had either jumped or fallen into the abyss. And there the matter had to rest after a few half-hearted attempts to descend with ropes and lanterns. But ever since then, Mrs. Jackson concluded, the feeling has grown around here that the wood and the cottage are haunted, and I doubt if a solitary soul has stepped inside its boundaries these 2 years, excepting one poacher from a hamlet 20 miles away who went there after pheasants and came in to me for the stiffest drink I'd got, that scared he couldn't or wouldn't tell exactly what he'd seen. But, I said, doesn't he sometimes shoot over it? Mrs. Jackson shook her head. Since that night, sir, there's never been a game bird in the whole covert, never a fox, never even a badger as far as I know. You could stop with me a 12-month, and you'd never hear the cry of one, night or day. Plenty in the other woods, but not this side of the house. Besides, she dropped her tone to a whisper, it's not only what doesn't live in the woods, sir, it's the poultry and things that's killed and taken away from the village, sir, by something that comes out of the wood. So people say. But good God, ejaculated, what do they think it is that haunts the wood? Your story's horrible enough in all conscience without the final touch about stolen chickens, which are most likely taken by foxes. But has anyone ever seen a ghost there? If so, what's it like? Is it the mad woman herself, or the poor little wretches she destroyed? Surely they would excite more pity than fear. Mrs. Jackson looked at me fixedly for a long, long moment before she answered, and twice I thought she was about to speak, and twice she failed. Then at last, "I have seen nothing, sir, and I don't think there's another woman or man in the village who has, because we've never stepped through the fence since that night she died. It's just the way we feel, and, as I've told you, sir, I, for my part, will not for £10,000. But the poacher," I cried out, "the man from 20 miles away who's after pheasants." Once more she looked at me fixedly in the same compelling silence. "He died, sir, within the month of drink and delirium, shouting out the words he first uttered when he staggered into my kitchen long after I'd closed the bar. 'The child! Oh, God! The horrible child!'" As may be imagined, this revolting story did more than fire my imagination for a ghost hunt. So graphically had Mrs. Jackson told it, and so obviously certain was she in her own mind that some dreadful curse or haunting had been left in the wood, that I found myself visualizing the murder or murders with uncomfortable clarity. And although I enjoyed the excellently cooked supper which I later consumed in a cosy lamplit parlour, I quite failed to derive the anticipated comfort from my night's rest in a little lean-to room which I had first much admired, notwithstanding the old-fashioned luxury of a feather bed. My window, for one thing, looked out upon the wood, and I must confess that my brain persisted in speculating on what I should encounter there the next day, for I had determined to reconnoitre it when full daylight should give me confidence. Towards morning I slept a little, my rest broken by half-waking dreams of weird formless things watching my window from the gloom of the thicket. I rose early and breakfasted well, telling Mrs. Jackson that 1 o'clock would suit me admirably for lunch. Then, carefully leaving my cap behind, for I knew that she would otherwise ask my destination and try to dissuade me, I strolled out, ostensibly to admire the garden. Once there, I quickly got out of sight among the pergolas and was soon through the wire fencing. My first action, after progressing some yards among the trees, was to produce my penknife and cut a stout branch from an ash sapling, which I trimmed off to a length of 3 feet. This imparted a measure of comfort and would be useful for poking into hollow trunks or killing possible adders. For one half of me never expected results in the ghost hunt, and sought to treat the expedition as a nature study ramble. The thickness of the undergrowth amazed me, since the upper foliage was extremely luxuriant, and I had noticed in other woods that such a condition usually killed off ground vegetation through lack of sun. Here, apparently, the soil, or some kind of dark loam, was sufficiently fertile to counteract this tendency, so that, what with trailing brambles and wild briars and thick curtains of creepers falling from higher branches, progress was really hard. I remember thinking, too, that it was for the same reason quite the gloomiest wood I had seen, a place of perpetual twilight even in this glorious June weather. I had made up my mind to seek out the cottage first, and then, if it revealed nothing of interest, to spend the rest of the morning idling about after insects and wildflowers. So, remembering that it was near the centre of the wood, I endeavoured to keep a course at right angles to the border from the point of entry, no easy matter in so tangled a thicket. At last, however, I burst through a screen of dead brushwood into a kind of leafy tunnel, much overgrown, but clearly a path. Just to my right, another track branched off on the opposite side, roughly in the direction I had been following, and after a moment's thought, I took to it, beating the brambles aside with my stick as I went along. All this time, but for the occasional clatter of a wood pigeon taking flight 40 feet overhead, I realized that I had been progressing in most uncanny silence. There had been no bird song, no scuttling of rabbits or rats, and never a sign of a squirrel. The fact dawned on me queerly, and I began to look round more carefully for traces of wildlife. There were, I observed, plenty of old nests in the bushes, and I had already stumbled into more than one rabbit hole, but whether any rabbits slept in the warrens underground, or whether they had been killed or driven out by fear of the unknown thing at which Mrs. Jackson had hinted, but I couldn't guess. Despite the warmth, I shivered, and tramped on along the winding path. Then, round a sharp bend, I was suddenly confronted by the cottage, a grey stone building, slate-roofed, and almost buried in a mass of ivy. Unlike those of most deserted dwellings, its windows were intact, though of course uncurtained, and the fact that the front door stood wide open, mute testimony to that last gamekeeper's state of mind when he took away his sticks of furniture, almost lent the place an air of immediate habitation. The cottage was much larger than I'd expected, having 2 stories, and I stood gazing at it for quite a minute before approaching further. Then, acting on some impulse of caution that I've never quite defined, I removed my shoes and stole in absolute silence across the small clearing until I stood on the front step, peering into the cobwebby little hall. The benefit I might have expected from the break in the trees forming the dwelling site was negatived by the obvious fact that the fine spell was at an end, for during my short journey the sky had become obscured by thunderclouds, so that the interior of the house was no lighter than the thicket through which I had come. But for this, I might have seen the baby handprints in the dust before I heard the cry. As it was, the sound reached me first, and I stiffened against the lintel in sheer astonishment. "Tata? Tata?" came clearly in a childish treble from somewhere upstairs, accompanied by the rhythmic thumping of some hard object on the bare boards. I stood absolutely petrified. It was so unmistakably the babble of a very young child that has not yet learned to speak, and yet Mrs. Jackson had said definitely that no one lived in the place, or indeed would venture near it. Still, someone must obviously be residing here unknown to the village, and I was about to announce myself with a "Hello there!" when I realized that if so, they must be purposely in hiding, perhaps from the law, and closed my lips. It was then that I glanced down and saw the little hand marks in the dust on the red tiles. They made definite tracks in all directions, crossing and recrossing each other, many of them partially smudged out where the baby's knees had followed as it had evidently crawled on all fours. Some traversed the step on which I was standing, indicating that it had been outside the cottage as well, and quite recently too, for there was not a speck of dust on these more clearly visible impressions. It struck me then, with a shudder for which I could not quite account, since the matter was more odd than terrifying, that every single imprint I could see had been made by the child itself. Nowhere was there the least sign of an adult footprint, and yet such thick dust must have lain many days, I could have believed months, since the last sweeping. I frowned thoughtfully and began tiptoeing across the flags to the foot of the stairs. After all, I was not going back at this point without solving the mystery, and if these queer people were, as they must be, fugitives from justice, they could not prosecute me for trespass, whilst, should they prove aggressive, I still had my ash plant and a strong arm. By this time, the great storm, which had gathered so speedily since I set out, began to break, and after a preliminary flash and distant rumble of thunder, a deluge of rain poured out of the sulphurous skies, its impact on the surrounding trees making a sullen, monotonous roar, above which I could still faintly hear the thumps of the child playing in the upstairs room, and its shrill "Dada! Dada!" My own muffled footfalls were quite inaudible, and so, hastening them, I stood a few seconds later on the almost pitch-dark landing outside the half-open door of the room from which the noise was coming. There was more light inside the room than in the hall below, the surrounding trees on that side of the house being somewhat stunted, and I could see quite distinctly the half that was visible through the doorway. Like the rest of the place, it was totally unfurnished, but close against the wall to the right, I noticed with astonishment a tumbled heap of carcasses of what appeared to be hens, rabbits, and other small creatures, furred or feathered, some just like white skeletons, but others more or less lately killed and strangely gashed and mutilated. A disgusting odour of rottenness emanated from the heap, and the floorboards all around seemed to be streaked with great gouts of blood. I think it was at this juncture that I felt my first thrill of real horror. as I asked myself into what hellhole I had wandered, where a little child played among the putrid bodies of birds and beasts, and there was still no sign of parent or nurse, depraved beyond all measure though such a person must be. But the sight that met me, as I at last nerved myself to peer furtively through the crack of the hinge, was the most weirdly unbelievable of all. Seated in the middle of the floor, with its back to me, it was the naked figure of a baby of perhaps 2 years, prattling wordlessly in its sing-song treble as it played with a pile of gleaming white objects arranged about it in a circle. One of these, a globular thing of peculiar configuration, it grasped in its right hand and banged down noisily among the rest. Opposite, just discernible in the shadowy corner, sat the largest brindled cat I had ever seen, dreamily watching the play through half-closed flame-yellow eyes. I suppose it must have been many minutes that I stood there, dumbfounded, staring at this incredible spectacle, before my dazed senses registered its full hideousness, and then a strangled gasp escaped me, for I saw that the toy in the child's hand was a tiny human skull, and that all the other white things were the various bones of an infant skeleton. Slight as it had been, my involuntary intake of breath broke the spell that had enfolded that dreadful room. With a hellish scream, the cat leapt to the open door, glared at me in bestial rage, and bounded past me down the stairs, whilst the child dropped the skull and sprang with almost equal agility to the heap of rotting carcasses. There it paused, and with no further sign of panic, slowly turned its face to mine. That was not only the most ghastly moment of my life, but the most faith-killing. I would not have believed it possible for such stark fear to engulf a human mind without destroying it. One can visualize the malignant expression of a brute desperado who never knew care or kindness, making his last stand for life. One can picture him equally unleashing all his lust, malice, and cruelty on defenseless women in time of revolution, and one only looks at him with anger and loathing, tempered, if one is very, very just, by pity that his loving child soul was crushed before it could develop. Somehow one always knows, pretty fancies apart, that he was once a child, loving and asking for love. This thing that confronted me in that place of death was spawn of hell, a foul thing, the greatest contradiction of faith that human eyes have ever beheld. It had the body of a child and the expression of the most frightful fiend. As I watched, petrified with terror, these thoughts tumbling tumultuously through my brain, I saw its malignant eyes light up with an unholy inner glow of triumph, and I saw one of its miniature hands delve down into the carcasses and come back bloody and holding a filthy old common kitchen knife. It gave a little babyish chuckle, infinitely horrible, and began to crawl towards me. And in the same moment I knew by some strange sense, without daring to look, that the great cat was creeping stealthily up the stairs behind me, its head swinging from side to side, and its baleful yellow orbs fixed with dreadful purpose on the back of my head. Shrieking like a frightened beast, I sprang backwards, twisting in the air as I went, and the next thing I can remember is running on and on in a drenching rain down one of the forest paths, whipping my face to ribbons on the thorns and nearly bursting my tortured lungs. They told me when I was better that I said nothing understandable during my period of delirium, for I do not know if what I saw was a spirit or an unthinkable survival, that of the fifth child, born as the woman passed through the wood on her way to death on the moor. After all, chickens feed themselves from the moment of hatching. The fact to be remembered is, however, that I will not divulge the real name of the place, for if I did, I should somehow be compelled to join another search party, and I could not bear to look at the child again. So I gave you a few minutes there to enjoy the crackling of the fire. Now that's over, and I'm going to try and sell you becoming a Patreon, and I'm going to sell you on the benefits. So you sign up for $5 a month through the link that's going to be above. I'm pointing up at the sky here, and this will allow you access to my Google Drive library of all the stories. I think there's 300 odd episodes, but on the Google Drive I've got like books as well. I think all the detective stories are there as well if you want those as well. That's $5 for the detective. So if you just want ghosts, five. Everything's $5. It's like a hamburger, $5. Bottle of beer, $5. Coffee, $5. But these are ad-free stories. So if you want them, sign up, become a patron, make me a happy man. Allow me to continue doing this for a living. So otherwise I'd have to go and work at Tesco's. But there's nothing wrong with working at Tesco's, but I prefer doing this. So that was The Child by L.A. Lewis, Leslie Allen Lewis, born 1899 in Sheffield, died 1961, the year that I was born. He was the only child of Arthur Henry Lewis, a brewer, and Catherine Mary Ann Allen. So it was quite common, I think, to take your mother's name as a middle name in those days. I think, yeah, my stepfather was had a middle name Wilson because that was his mother's name. And anyway, there we go. So his early life was spent on the Allen family estate at East Hendred in Berkshire, and he received his education at Royce's School in Abingdon, now known as Abingdon School. Even as a young boy, he displayed a creative streak, writing and illustrating stories about a panther called Blackie. During the First World War, Lewis joined the Artist Rifles and trained as a pilot, earning a certificate as a flyer in 1917. After the war, he pursued further studies in aeroengineering and obtained an instructor's license. So he was interested in flying, and this comes through in some of his stories. His father, we don't know tons about him, but his father seems to have died in about 1925, and he moved with his mother to live with her family in the Finchley area of London. And then he joined the RAF in the Second World War. Before that, he published a story in 1929 because he was writing all the time called The Chords of Chaos in the Theosophist. Now, I'm not going to go into what Theosophy was, but it was like a New Age type religion before they had New Age religions. It was a mix of Eastern Hinduism and Buddhism with a dose of Christian mysticism and occult, Western occult stuff. And gave birth to all sorts of later occult societies. Madame Blavatsky was the famous name of Theosophy, but Annie Besant as well. You can still find books on Theosophy. I think it's still a thing, to be honest. So it indicates his interest in the occult, and I thought that was interesting, given that he starts off by saying he's not a member of the Psychical Research or hasn't written any books on the occult, and I think he was interested in that kind of thing, which comes through in the story. He only produced a single collection of stories, Tales of the Grotesque, 1934, and I think we would definitely say that this is not. This is a step up from M.R. James in that, I don't mean in quality, although I didn't think it was a bad story at all. I thought it was very nicely written. It was very easy to narrate, but it's not a ghost story. M.R. James can be quite horrific, but he's not gory, whereas this is bordering on the gory stories that we would later come in to find in the Pan Book of Horror Stories, edited by, what's his name, Van Taal, Herbert Van Taal? Name escapes me at the moment. I think that's right, though. So he has a story called the Tower of Moab, which is about a demon-haunted headquarters of an unusual sect, the Tower of Moab is very well received in people who like that kind of pulpy, weird fiction, amazing tales sort of thing, which I'm one of them, to be honest. So he had an interest in the occult, let's say. So he only produced one volume of stories, but they were well regarded. And I got this story from an anthology called by Hugh Lamb, put together by Hugh Lamb in 1973, called A Wave of Fear. And I've got a lot of good stories from that. But as is characteristic of the 70s, we're talking about horror stories, not completely, but they're becoming more horrific rather than just plain ghost stories. Anyway, he died in 1961. My notes say he had a heart attack while he was in hospital, but I don't have very much detail about it at all. We don't know much about him at all. Well, other people may do, but I haven't been able to find much about him. So this story, The Child, was part of his The Tales of the Grotesque in October 1934, and it has been anthologized. The Tales of the Grotesque has been printed. You can actually find, like the Folio Society. I'm not sure it's them, but you can find kind of deluxe editions, hand-stitched illustrations. So it's a well-regarded book. Okay. And I think, he's been anthologized. I think I said that, didn't I? So let's talk about, there are four things, I'm trying to be disciplined. There are four things I want to talk about in relation to this story. And the first is the cult of the child. I'm going to kind of gallop through them as I always do. So the cult of the child. Why is that, the cult of the child? You've got to think about earlier times, Middle Ages, right up through 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. Life was short and hard. So if you had children, you got them to work. There was no romanticizing the child. The child would work and work hard from an early age, even doing jobs that the small size of the child made it specially fitted for, such as being a chimney sweep, of course, until that was banned. And then the Victorians get all sentimental about children's rights, and they stop them going down the pits and climbing up chimneys and doing horrible things. Obviously, I think that was a good thing, in case you didn't get the irony or the joke in my voice. But it's not a joke, is it? But I wasn't being completely serious when I said all sorts of good things, just in case you're very literal-minded. And then they come up with this idea, and it's in Dickens as well, and a lot of Victorian, the flower fairies and all this kind of stuff. There's this cult of the innocent child. So the child goes from being just a small person to having a special status as an innocent, curly-haired sort of wonderful creature that comes into the world pure. And of course this is against Christian doctrine, which tells us we come in as sinners. We have the mark of Cain on us, don't we? We have original sin on us when we come into the world. So the Victorians in their cult of the child have kind of gone against this and have this idea of, I don't have to labour it, but if you examine it, you see the child is considered this innocent, beautiful, wonderful thing. So roll on a few decades, and as is inevitable, people start to subvert that. You set up a holy cow, probably mixing my metaphors there, and initially what happens is, I said this, it's on the tip of my tongue. Look at Teslas, yeah? Holy cow. So the Tesla car, I'm not talking about your man Elon, I'm talking about the car, the electric car. Tesla is lauded as, this is going to save the planet. This is going to be so fantastic. It's going to save the planet. And then, as with everything that is set up as being wonderful, roll on a bit and people start, in this case, setting them on fire. Now, interestingly, there was a case in London where Just Stop Oil attacked a Tesla dealership. And like, that is paradoxical, really, because probably Tesla, for all their faults, have done more in the West to promote electric cars, whether you think electric cars are good or bad or indifferent. But if you take it that, we thought we were, the word on the street was electric cars were great, and we're all going to be driving electric cars. The government is going to ban petrol and diesel cars in the UK in the 2030s, 2035, I think, on new ones anyway. So electric cars are deemed to be the future, and they're going to save the planet. And then Just Stop Oil, who's against petrol cars, starts burning electric cars. I think they just threw paint, to be fair. But that's weird. So that's a slight digression. Probably got you spluttering in your coffee, whichever political side you're on. But yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? But the point is, the cult of the child. The children are set up as wonderful, and then we have stories like this who use that to create extra horror. So we've got this idea of the innocent, beautiful child, which is, and in fact in this story, it's a monster. So, and of course we have Henry James is the turn of the screw when we see this. The two children, particularly the boy, they're sort of wicked, evil, aren't they? And I think, that is certainly one example of it. And of course, later on we have William Golding's The Lord of the Flies, and those children are really unpleasant, So, but I think this is an example of that subversion of the proclaimed innocence of the child. The child is going to be everything. I don't think you should go and set him on fire, all right? Okay, that's a joke as well. I'm not obviously inciting anything like that. In fact, I'm telling you not to do it. So just bloody stop it. If you were thinking of it, stop it now. Right, okay, let's move on quick. Ghosts. Second point I want to talk about is lingering ghosts. So another convention is, we see it in Hamlet. Does it happen in the Bible? I don't know. But it goes back. The Greeks have it. Do the Greeks have it? Oh, I should have looked this up. But anyway, certainly in Hamlet, let's stick with Shakespeare. Don't shoot Shakespeare down now. I know he's going... Shakespeare, he's been banned by his own people. Apparently, the Shakespeare Society are saying what a, monster he was in lots of ways. You'll have to look at that yourself, because I'm already in hot water. So these attitudes, yeah. So anyway, let's just stick to Hamlet. His father's ghost comes and says, look at this, it's bad crack. You've got to wrong it. And so this idea is a really old one, that ghosts will linger in the countryside to point out. The function of ghosts has changed over the years. Of course, in Elizabethan times, their main job was to point out treasure, because the diggers in Elizabethan times were a real plague. They were looking for treasure, digging up archaeological remains, looking for treasure. That was the big deal, and it was very common to be a digger. It's like playing the lottery now, really. You're not going to win, but you're just going to... It's just, at best, it's futile. At worst, it's destructive. So, anyway, I'm being controversial today. And then they get this job of, which I've always had a bit of, saying, hey, wrongs have been done, I need you to right them. So, okay, that's the lingering ghost. So, but I think what Lewis does really well, he misdirects us, doesn't he? We have the classic English village. It's beautiful. You're sitting in the pub garden. It's a lovely warm June day. There's birds singing. You've got a pint of homemade ale brewed locally. You've probably got a bread and cheese. I read L.T.C. Roat's book about how he started off on the canals, and he has this beautiful scene where probably in the 30s, him and his missus go and find this idyllic pub where they have their own bread and cheese and ale, and it's like the English dream, probably particularly an English dream, actually, of this unspoiled countryside where honest people live doing clean things. And so this is how he sets it up, and then we get the classic ghost story, bad things have happened in that woods, sir, but I'm not going to tell you what. And then she does tell him. And there we go. And so we immediately, the first thing, so we set up for ghosts, aren't we? So he sets us up for ghosts, and that's a misdirection because it's not a ghost. Is it a ghost? Might be a ghost, but I think he sets us up for ghosts, and then he says, nah, tell you what it is next. It's a feral child. And then we go, oh, goodness me, so the child was born and left to fend for itself. And we've got, Romulus and Remus in Rome. We've got Mowgli in Kipling's The Jungle Book. This idea that children can be raised by beasts, in this case, a big cat. And they catch their own chickens, because a ghost isn't going to come in your garden and steal your chickens. But this monstrous... it's hard to know how the monstrous child would get across the fence and stuff, but anyway, let's not get into that. But it is a monstrous child, isn't it? So that leads us on to the second... That's the second misdirection. The first is it's a ghost. No, it's not a ghost. Second is it's a feral child. No, it's not a feral child. Because how could it do those things? And then the third thing is, returning to what we said at the beginning, it is demonic, and the presence of the baleful-eyed yellow cat. Cats are often considered supernatural creatures, or aware of the supernatural, aren't they? I mean, the witch is familiar, but also consider my cat Geoffrey, who is electric against... I've talked about this poem. You have to look it up yourself. I haven't got time now. I haven't got time. I haven't got time. I've got to go and do something else. So, yeah, the demonic cat. And so I think the third alternative is that it's a demon, it's demonic. And I think when it picks up the knife and it crawls towards him, it is absolutely demonic. And he sees so he talks about how, even the most awful human desperado, we know that person was a child once and was innocent, harking back to this idea of the innocent child, this Victorian idea, and therefore needed love and protection. I mean, I think we still got that idea. It's not a bad thing, protecting children, okay? I think it's a good thing. I'm going on the record for that. But in this case, that isn't present, so it's othered, isn't it? It's dehumanized. It's not human at all. It's a demon, and the fact that it's in partnership with this massive cat also suggests there's some kind of demonic force in play. And this ties back to what we know about his probable interest in the occult. He almost says it, doesn't he, at the beginning? And we know from what little we know of his life. And then we kind of the question arose to me. Well, what if this is a demonic situation? Usually, what you find, look at the Amityville Horror. The Amityville Horror starts with a murder in that house, and that is seen as there needs to be some sin that lets the demon in. Right? There's some terrible sin, and I think the sin in this story is the mother's uncaring. She is the greatest sin for a woman is not to love and protect her children. I've talked about this before. The greatest sin for a man is to be a coward and not protect his family. That is the unforgivable sin. The unforgivable sin for a woman is not to love the fruit of her loins, and this is what she's guilty of. And also, added to that, she's mean with money. She's disparaging of her husband. She's probably promiscuous, hence all the children. And because I think when the last one was born, the husband's already dead. So that is the implication, isn't it? So all those terrible things that they say about this woman, is that the sin that lets the demon in? I think it might be. But she's also insane. So that's another interesting. We talked about the child being innocent. We look at the desperado and we see the child, and we forgive the child, forgive the monster, the man in front of us, the evil man in front of us doing evil things. I always used to say to my patients when I was working, they'd come in and go, "I'm really bad," and I would joke with them, "What have you done that's bad? Do you hit old ladies? Do you steal cats' food? Do you go into the church and rob the poor box?" And they would go, "No, I don't do that." And then they would give them some ridiculous thing. "Well, I'm bad because," and they didn't really know why they were bad. And I said to them, even if you were bad, test me on this one. A bad person is someone that does bad things. As soon as they start doing good things, they're no longer a bad person. So you may have done terrible things in the past, but as soon as you start doing good things, you're no longer bad. Yeah, that's what I think. I accept that could be challenged, but that is my rule of thumb. But she didn't stop. Oh, yeah. Okay. So we're talking about how the bad man is absolved in a small way because he was an innocent child. The other way of absolving somebody from wickedness is by painting them as being insane. So say example today, I'm not going to do this. I'm not saying it's a good thing. Say I go and I find an old lady with her walking from, and I push her over in front of a car. I'm not going to do that. So don't get upset. I'm not going to do it. I think it's a dreadful thing to do. Right? But say I did do it, and the police come, and if I just done it because I'm a bad piece of work, they'd batter me, handcuff me, send me to jail, and I'd be punished. Correctly, probably. Now, if I said a voice in my head, and I wasn't lying just to get off the charge, and it was true, told me to do it, they go, they wouldn't batter me, they'd probably still handcuff me. They would take me to a hospital where I'd be treated. Because in the second, I'm considered innocent. It's not me that did it. It's some mysterious force, i.e. madness. This is very interesting. Remember I've talked about how the Greeks, particularly the Homeric Greeks, they felt that when you had an emotion, say you fell in love, you were possessed by the goddess Aphrodite. Mars would possess you to anger, They believed that Jupiter was the sky, and Jupiter is crying, because, so it was all personified. So it was felt that human, okay, the sky is not a human thing, but say emotions were the results of the possession of the gods, so you weren't responsible for them. It was still this idea. I mean, there used to be this series called Crimes of Passion that was about France, because we always consider, people in Britain always consider, potentially not the Scots, they always get on with the French. I like the French as well, just saying. People can misconstrue stuff when you just say something. But anyway, I'm a Francophile. And, so they would have this crime of passion whereby if you murdered somebody out of passion, it wasn't treated as severely, it wasn't punished as severely. So there is this idea that if we are possessed by an emotion beyond our control, we are not as morally culpable for it. And that is true with madness. And so I wonder whether the madness of the woman is a way of letting her off the hook. Yes, she was a horrible bitch, but she was mad. So it wasn't all her fault. She deserves treatment, not punishment. Yeah. Now, the final point I want to make is the equivalence of madness and demonic possession. Now, we know that in certain cultures, there have been court cases about this. It's still considered that what we in the clinical West would call psychosis, and even epilepsy in earlier days was considered as some kind of possession by an outside demonic force. And we have the Gerasene swine, don't we, in the Bible, where there's this this man who's clearly mad, living in a graveyard, injuring himself, doing things that psychiatric patients do today. He is possessed by a demon, which Christ then casts out. So this equivalence, and people who had epilepsy would fall to the ground, and we know that's a neurological condition, but it was certainly this feeling that there was some kind of evil associated with it. People are frightened of it. People are frightened of unpredictable behaviour, and so we tend to, what we're frightened of, we tar up as evil, don't we? So that's a whole PhD subject, probably nobody would be brave enough to do at the moment. But to talk about, we could do if we condemned it thoroughly, this equivalence of insanity and evil, yeah, not because demons are just a proxy for evil. So you can say, in the same way we said about the Greek gods, he is possessed by a demon, therefore he's doing evil things. But what if we say that the insanity itself is equivalent to evil? And I'm not saying it is. I'm definitely not saying it is. But I think it would be interesting to look historically and psychologically at why people might think that. Why? And I would put it down to the fact that when people behave in an irrational, violent manner, we're really frightened of them. And so what we're frightened of we call evil. Yeah. Anyway, lots of interesting things we can pull out of that one, but that's about all I've got time for, because I can hear my doggy woggy wogs coming up the stairs. I've been really worried about Jasper's paw. I don't know if I was saying that, but it's looking like it's healing. So thank you for all your prayers and the other stuff you were doing. Sheila's friends were sending kind of new age healing. I was saying a few prayers, and it seems to be on the mend. So thank you for that. So I'm so relieved. There we are. Thank you.
Everybody dies, don't they? Everybody come back, don't they? Isn't that so?
You tried to get into the locked room today, didn't you?
How do the dead come back, Mother? What's the secret?